tale of the Annie C. Maguire, based on the actual December 24th, 1886 shipwreck. As most details are unknown, this is an historical fiction narrative based on newspaper accounts and the creator's imagination. Lighthouses guide ships through the darkness, fog, snow, and mist. Since 1791, the entrance to Casco Bay has been marked by the Portland Head Light. The light is a beacon for navigation and also a welcome to the city on the hill. The reason for the wreck of the Annie C. Maguire at a location so well marked and charted is a mystery of the sea. Hi there, I'm Tommy Carbone, Maine author and regional explorer, and today on My Maine Matters, we're here at Portland Head Light, quite possibly Maine's most iconic lighthouse. During the summer, tour bus after tour bus will circle around that drive and drop tourists off to get a glance at the lighthouse and take a selfie. But we're here in winter to talk about what happened on Christmas Eve, 1886, because it was on that evening when the Annie C. Maguire shipwrecked right there on the ledge at Portland Head Light. There's a lot of questions around what happened to the ship, why it went aground there. It has stumbled tourists and historians and locals alike for more than 135 years. Questions abound about how a ship of expert seamen who traveled up and down the Atlantic grounded here in the harbor, right close to this headlight. Some of the crewmen even said they saw the light right before it went aground. And why did the Portland sheriff come out to the lighthouse and ask the keeper to keep an eye out for the ship? It's all these questions and more we have to explore today on My Maine Matters. Come on, let's go explore. The Maine coast is home to a fabulous series of lighthouses from Kittery to Lubec. Each summer, tourists and locals alike drive to, hike to, and take boats to the lights. They go to catch a sunrise, the sunset, the moon rising behind the lighthouse tower, or even to get the light beacon flashing just perfectly in their selfie. These are just a few of my favorite photos I've snapped of the lighthouses along the Maine coast. Can you name them all? Add the names of the lights in the comments below and let me know which light is your favorite. Probably none of Maine's lighthouses is more photographed than Portland Head Light at the entrance to Portland Harbor. The light is easily accessible by car with ample parking and is thus visited by tens of thousands each year. While the location makes for an iconic Maine photo, there's also some interesting history and at least one mystery that's worth a telling. So join me for this episode of My Maine Matters, and we'll head up into Portland Harbor, following the course of the Annie C. Maguire past Willard Rock, Pine Tree Ledge, and Jordan's Reef to where she came to rest at Portland Head. The history of Portland Head Light begins not long after the forming of the United States. While construction of the light supposedly began in the late 1780s, the building had stalled for lack of funds. The money to complete the construction of Portland Head was then commissioned under orders from President George Washington, and Congress appropriated the required funds. United States Coast Guard history states George Washington engaged two masons from the town of Portland and instructed them to take charge of the construction of a lighthouse. George Washington reminded the masons that the colonial government was poor and that the materials used to build the lighthouse should be taken from the fields and shores nearby. As a result of Washington's orders, the old tower was built of rubble stone. That is some story. Did President George Washington himself engage with the masons on a lighthouse far away on the coast of the state of Massachusetts? Let me know what you think in the comments. You can find that story on the U.S. Coast Guard military site. The light was completed into operation in the year 1791. During the first century of operation, the tower height was changed several times. The first keeper's quarters was constructed at the time of the first light, and it was rebuilt in the early 1800s and then in 1890 to the two-story building we see there today. A keeper lived at the light until the light was fully automated in 1989. Today, the United States Coast Guard has responsibility for the light and the fog signal. The museum and the other buildings in what is now Fort Williams Park are owned and operated by the town of Cape Elizabeth. Many visitors to Portland Headlight might miss the marker in memory of the mystery of the Annie C. Maguire. This is the story behind the message, painted in white on the ledge where the vessel came aground. The fate of the Annie C. was determined nearly a century after the lighthouse first shone a beacon over Casco Bay. Our narrative takes us back to Christmas Eve in the year 1886. The keeper's home was closed tight against the weather. Lighthouse keeper Joshua Strout, the keeper there for near on 20 years on that day, was keeping watch of the ships entering the harbor. He had a habit, or hobby, to identify each ship in his logbook. Should he not know the ship's name or could not read it through his telescope, he'd jot down some words of description of the schooners, clippers, and barques that traveled into and out of the harbor, going past the light, the time of day, and the weather conditions. The ledges along the shore and the fields behind the house were covered in several inches of snow that morning. They were sure to have a white Christmas. His logbook noted the light winds and fair conditions of the sea. Keeper Strout was anticipating a quiet Christmas Eve with his wife and son, and looking forward to neighbors and friends visiting for Christmas dinner the next day. He settled in his chair, pencil in hand, to watch several ships approaching from between Jordan's Reef and Witch Rock. Not far away in Portland, many ships had already found a berth or were at anchor in the harbor, their crews enjoying themselves in the working town for the holiday. One person had to leave the town and take a 6-mile carriage ride through the villages out to Portland Head. Keeper Strout greeted the sheriff with a welcome of the season. Over a cup of warm cider, the sheriff explained his purpose. When the sheriff departed, Keeper Strout assured the sheriff he would notify him if the Annie C. Maguire made away past the light sometime over the next couple of days. The barque was well known to Strout, for the ship made a few passes a year to Portland, dealing in the lumber trade. An hour after the sheriff left, Keeper Strout noted in his logbook, thick fog approaching, snow showers. From his window, he noticed his wife topping off the seed for her feathered friends. Leaving Joshua on watch, he set down his pencil and, lantern in hand, went down to the living quarters to check on the status of supper. You know, it's quite possible that Keeper Strout came down from the lighthouse tower that day, Christmas Eve, and found his wife Mary roasting some fresh chestnuts over the fire, possibly for Christmas Day stuffing, something like that, but it's nothing like a good roasted chestnut on a cold Maine winter day. You know, we don't know about if they had chestnuts on that Christmas Eve. We also don't know why the sheriff supposedly made that trip out from Portland to Portland Headlight to see Keeper Strout. The reports in the papers are pretty sparse about why the sheriff traveled out there on that wintry day. There are rumors that the ship or the owners were in debt and he may have had a lien on the boat or the cargo. We don't know. That's part of the mystery. The Annie C. by 1886 would have been considered an old ship for its kind. Originally, the 188-foot-long ship was named Golden State and she was known for her speed. In its earlier years, the owners used the vessel for a brisk trade in the Far East with China and other ports. The ship had sailed those long routes for more than 2 decades. After that time, she was sold to a Canadian firm, renamed the Annie C. Maguire, and subsequently re-rigged as a barque for heavier cargo and slower voyages. For many of those later trips, she was loaded with lumber from northeast ports, such as Portland, Maine. It is reported that her return cargo was often a hold full of bird manure, which was used as fertilizer, giving a revised meaning to poop deck. Out in the Gulf of Maine, the Annie C was in fact sailing up the coast, returning from Buenos Aires following a delivery of lumber. The captain later reported he had planned to sail for the Bay of Fundy, but changed course on account of the snow squalls and poor visibility. From being on the high seas for so long, the anticipation of a safe harbor and being in port on Christmas Eve must have been a welcome reprieve for the crew. The chart of Portland Harbor was open on the desk in the captain's quarters. Earlier in the day, Captain O'Neill and the first mate reviewed the charts of the harbor they'd entered many times before. A crew member on deck watch noted to the first mate at the wheel that he had spotted the light of Portland Head in the distance, or so he thought. Down in the forecastle, the crew sat around the table talking of Christmases long ago. On this voyage, Captain O'Neill was accompanied by his wife and 12-year-old son. The 3 of them were enjoying a family dinner, and the parents had given their son a present to open. Up on deck, the mate pushed off the ice and snow that was accumulating under the rigging faster than he could scrape. He called down for extra hands. The calm anticipation of a night in port was about to change. Hi there, glad to see you still here. That means you've been enjoying this content from My Maine Matters. And if you would, please help me share this content. Please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Click that share icon and share it to your social media network, or copy the link and share with a few family members or friends. Because that not only helps me share the content, it helps you. Because YouTube algorithm will learn this is the kind of videos you like to watch. So it's a win-win. Oh, one more thing. Please leave a short comment down below, because that helps the algorithm learn even better about the videos you want to watch. Thanks a lot. Keeper Joshua Strout and his wife Mary, who was also the assistant lightkeeper, along with their 17-year-old son Joseph, in addition to their keeper duties, had spent the late afternoon preparing for Christmas Day. Mary had baked several chicken pot pies for the Strout Christmas feast they planned on celebrating with family and neighbors the following day. Joshua and Joseph finished hanging the evergreen boughs along the doorways and mantels. All through the day the snow was falling lightly. By 4 in the afternoon it was dark inside, and Mary lighted the candles. The shadows of the flames danced on the inside walls. The family then gathered to enjoy their supper of chowder and warm biscuits. After a smoke of his pipe, Joshua lit the oil lamps that guided the stairway up the lantern deck, and he looked out upon the Atlantic. He could see no ship lanterns through the snow and darkness. He made a note in his logbook of the conditions. The melody of Mary playing carols on the piano drew him back to the warmth of the hearth and her voice. Around 11 p.m., Keeper Strout made ready for his final rounds. He looked in on teenager Joseph, who was already sleeping. After a half hour, Keeper Strout rose and went to the kitchen. Standing near the stove, the tea kettle in his hand, he looked out the south-facing window. He squinted. Was he really seeing what he was seeing? Dropping the metal kettle to the floor, he yelled,
"Turn out! Wreck on the rocks! Turn out!"
Considering it was only the 3 Strouts at the keeper's house, the cause for alarm had Joshua reverting to his seaman's days and calling his crew. Turn out, I say! Wreck on the rocks! He yelled down the hall to the bedrooms as he pulled on the bell cord. Outside, the scene was all in shadows. Only a few lighted lamps remained on the vessel that was wedged along the southern section of cliffs.
What ship is there?
The crew of the Annie C was scrambling on the deck, slipping on the ice, sea, and snow as their ship creaked against the ledge. Assessing the scene before him, Joshua heard the words of a verse in his mind. She struck where the white and fleecy waves look soft as carded wool, but the cruel rocks, they gored her side like the horns of an angry bull. What ship is there? Yelled Keeper Strout. I be Captain O'Neill of the Annie C. Maguire, came the reply. How long do you estimate you have, Captain? She's taken on water at the bow, but seems wedged in tight for the moment in the calm sea. The keeper heard the captain yelling with his crew. The mates say we're stable, but the rocks are mighty icy, and surely we'll all be taken to Duncan should we try to cross over. The ladders, father? Joseph asked. Joshua nodded. Mr. Keeper, my wife is also aboard. Keeper Strout knew immediately the captain's concerns. Then bring a hawser along with the first men. We'll ring a gang line, shouted Strout. Oh my, Joshua, do you think the captain's wife will be safe riding on such? Asked Mary. Oh, my wife, remember when Joseph used the life preserver and slid down on the rope from the tower? Oh yes, she said. I nearly killed him. Keeper Strout too remembered the day. He said to Mary, we shall hope Mrs. O'Neill is as nimble as a young boy. The afternoon editions of the papers on that Christmas day from Quebec to New York printed the telegraph news of the shipwrecked Annie C. Maguire. In Portland, the story was front page news. Mary did her best to feed the men a hearty breakfast. During the night, they had already eaten the 8 chicken pot pies she had on the counter. Early that Christmas morning, I wonder if Keeper Strout may have noticed Captain O'Neill's son reading the keeper's copy of George Proctor's The Fisherman's Memorial and Record Book. The boy may have found the volume in Joshua's library and took an interest in the sea stories. Being from Canada, the young boy might have asked about the Gloucester schooner Edward A. Horton. Could have been Keeper Strout even told the boy the 1871 fishing tale. He may have started it as so. Oh, sure, I saw the Edward A. Horton many a times sailing into Portland Harbor here. This was the story, young man.
The day retired serene and fair. The lights were glancing here and there, while gently swung the twilight down on a rocky neck of Gloucester town.
In 1871, the 80-ton Gloucester fishing schooner Edward A. Horton was seized by Canadian authorities in the Northumberland Strait off of Nova Scotia. The schooner was held captive in the shallow, winding harbor at Guysborough. For American Captain Harvey Knowlton, the latest injustice proved too much. He hatched a daring plan to regain his vessel.
Boom, and a cannon's voice rang out. Boom, and a mingled cheer and shout. With drum and trumpet swelled the din. Yeah, the Hortons in, the Hortons in. Yeah, the Hortons in, the Hortons in. Yeah, the Hortons in, the Hortons in. The Hortons in, the Hortons in.
And now the account is told in this new historical fiction book, Avenging the Edward A. Horton. Ask for it wherever books are sold. The crew of the NEC didn't sleep in the overnight. They sat by the fire and calmed their nerves with the libations they carried off the ship. And with each bend of an elbow, the narrative of the grounding of their vessel became ever more elaborate. When the sun came over the horizon on Christmas morning, they made a few trips over to the boat to carry off more of their personal belongings. The living room of the keeper's house now looked more like a ship's chandlery. Ditty bags and seamen's implements were piled in the corners and on the furniture. The men were in fine Christmas spirits, having a warm place to ride out the weather and enjoy the Christmas holiday. Young Joseph had a wonderful Christmas, listening to the crew's recollections of ports up and down the Atlantic from Canada to South America. For Mrs. Strout, the surprised visitors were eating her out of Lighthouse and home.
Oh, blow the man down, bullies, blow the man down. To me
Way, blow the man down.
Blow the man down, bullies, blow him away.
Give me some time to blow the man down. We went over the bar on the 13th of May. Way, blow the man down. But Gallagher jumped and the gale came away. Give me some time to blow the man down.
As I was a-walking down Paradise Street,
Blow the man down.
a saucy young damsel I happened to meet.
Give me some time to blow the man down.
I says to her,
On the days immediately following the wreck, the captain was repeatedly questioned by the authorities about the circumstances before his running aground. Captain O'Neill was also interviewed by several insurance men about the weather, his charting, and his crew's competence. Another story spread through Portland. Could it be true? The rumors of what Mrs. O'Neill busied herself with before departing the ship the night of the wreck? Did the captain's wife have something to do with so little money being located in the ship's chest? Or are those stories just all old sea tales? Meanwhile, the desperate crew had made a bargain with the captain for salvage money's share, and they were working against the sea to carry off as much of what they could sell before the ship went to pieces. The crew thus took the sails and planking and made temporary tents on the lighthouse front walk. Within was piled rigging, galley implements, tools, spare sails, and anything else they could carry off that might fetch even a half a dollar. Oh, the conditions on the grounds outside the lighthouse might have been disruptive to Mrs. Strout, but having 10 crewmen bunking on her living room floor under her Christmas tree was quite taxing. And while the crew had no intention of leaving until their wages were paid, once the bulk of the salvage was taken off the ship, they made a list of the property and took rooms at a seaman's hotel in Portland, where they were housed under funds for shipwreck crews. Hi there. Thanks for sticking around for this episode of My Maine Matters. Seems you're enjoying this sea tale about the Annie C. Maguire. Well, I've got another recommendation for you, and that's Avenging the Edward A. Horton. The story is about a Gloucester mackerel schooner by that name. She was taken captive by the Canadian authorities up in the provinces off of Canso. And the captain, Harvey Knowlton, had had enough of the Canadian shenanigans because, you see, for years they were capturing American ships and auctioning off the catch and even the ships in some cases. So he took a crew and went up there to get his ship back. And the story of the Edward Horton became part of Gloucester fishing lore. Still is. Ballads were written about it. Fanny Hardy Ekstrom researched the ballad and wrote about it in her book. And Maine's Mallet Brothers Band. They recorded the Hortons in on their album Falling of the Pine. Check that out. You heard a little bit of it before, earlier in this episode. So it's a great story, and it's about as close as you can get, even though it's historical fiction, to what actually happened that year up in Canada. You know, another story around the sea and ships is Clothes Make the Pirate. This is from Home and Day, and this is an annotated edition that includes some new information that I've put into the book. But it's a great story. It takes place from Boston Harbor all the way up to Castine in Maine, well before it was Maine on the maps. And also takes place in Old Pemaquid, when Captain Dixie Bull came to Pemaquid to pillage that small little town. And it's kind of a comedy of a story, but it'll include some true historical facts of the times from Maine, so you might find that interesting. Holman Francis Day might be most well known for his books of ballads, but he also wrote about 18 or 20 novels, mostly about the Maine North Woods and sea tales. He was a newspaper man, editor, newspaper owner, but also a film producer. His novel, Clothes Make the Pirate, was made into a popular silent film at the time.
Shall we do with the drunken sailor? What shall we do with the drunken sailor early in the morning?
And both Clothes Make the Pirate and Avenging the Edward A. Horton are available in these wonderful hardcover books, which make great gifts for someone on your Christmas list or even yourself. Don't worry, I won't tell. You can find them exclusively online at barnesandnoble.com, or the links are at tommycarbone.com. By December 28th, the news headlines read, "A barque condemned." A survey has been held on the barque A&C Maguire, ashore at Cape Elizabeth, and she has been condemned. Her bottom is badly stove, and she will go to pieces in the first storm. The Maguire was formerly the well-known clipper ship Golden State, hailing from New York, which made many excellent passages between New York and San Francisco in the early days of California trade. That report was from the Evening Gazette in Pittston, Pennsylvania, over 400 miles away on the Susquehanna River. News traveled swiftly about the once record-setting clipper. Keeper Strout watched the Annie C. Maguire from his window. More lines from the Longfellow poem came to his mind. He wondered how long the ship would stay together. Her rattling shrouds all sheathed in ice, with the masts went by the board. Like a vessel of glass, she stove and sank. Ho, 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 the breakers roared. He had added an extra ho on the count of the day. By the first of the year, the ship was no more. This was from the New Year's edition of the Bangor Daily Whig and Courier. Barque A.C. Maguire, wrecked at Portland Headlight a few days ago, broke up this morning, and the wreck is now all along the shore for a mile or so. The breaking up was the work of a very few minutes after the waves became large. Had the sea of this morning been running at the time of the wreck, all on board would have been lost. For near 2 weeks, that January in 1887, the crew spent their days along Commercial Street, commiserating on if they would be awarded enough to get home to the provinces of Canada. Some days they even sat in the courtroom and listened to the arguments. Finally, on January 14th, the papers reported that 38% of the salvage was awarded to the men. The total amount was figured at $657.69 exactly. This was for the 10 crew members, and then adding in the mate, the judgment came to $730.28 exactly, and was thus about $66.40 per man. This amount they were to receive less costs and expenses, all for salvaging sails, rigging, and other ship's implements during the winter cold on a slick icy deck of a ship that was about to go to pieces. This value would be about $2,200 in 2025 currency. "35 years later, in 1912, John Strout, who had become the lightkeeper and was the grandson of Keeper Joshua Strout, added the words about the Annie C. Maguire wreck to the rock at Portland Head Light. It was an event that had occurred before he was even born. During high tide and high surf, the gap here between the ledge is full of water, so you can imagine what it would have been like on that cold Christmas Eve with ice and snow on these rocks. It is here where the Strout family placed the ladders so the crew could get off the Annie C. There were several notable wrecks in the 1800s off of Cape Elizabeth, Maine. In 1807, the Charles, a fishing schooner, there were 16 fatalities. In 1864, the Bohemian, a passenger steamer, had 42 fatalities of the 250 on board. The Helen Eliza in 1869 had 11 fatalities of that fishing schooner. In 1874, the Australia cargo schooner out of Booth Bay went down with 1 fatality, the captain. 1886, the Annie C, no fatalities. And in 1897, the Susan P. Thurlow, a schooner with 6 fatalities. So it was only the Annie C that came to demise directly at the shore and within jumping distance of the Portland Head Light, permitting all on board to survive. You may find several conflicting accounts about the Annie C. Maguire and the circumstances of her wreck written online. One report has the captain's name as Thomas O'Neill, and on the ship were his wife and young son, Thomas Jr., with a total of 14 persons aboard. So that would be 10 crew and 1 mate, plus the 3 O'Neills. Another report has the name as Captain Daniel, not Thomas O'Neill, and thus the boy could not have been a junior. And with the captain were his wife's son, 2 mates, and 13 crewmen, for a total of 18 people. I've read a story that the ship was heavily insured and the captain was carrying out orders of the owners to ground the old ship for the insurance, while another account says the legal proceedings noted the ship was not insured to any great amount. There are writings that summarize the captain's wife removed the captain's wallet and the ship's monetary notes from the sea chest before she left the ship. No proof was discovered for such an act. But it makes for a good ship's tale, no? Memories are often clouded, and such orally handed down stories may be fanciful to explain the wreck. There is yet another mystery about a sign at Portland Head Light. This one involves the poet who made a guest appearance in this episode, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. There are several pages online with a mention that Longfellow used to take the 6-mile walk from Portland to the lighthouse twice a week to sit and talk with the keeper. The Four River Bridge was built in 1822, and the trek from Congress Street, where Longfellow lived, in Portland to Portland Head Light would have been about 4 to 5 miles. Not a long stretch by any means. However, by the time Joshua Strout became keeper in the year 1869, Longfellow was already 62 years old and had long since removed from his Portland home and was living at Craig House in Cambridge. His move to Boston came after his second European tour for further study. He returned to the United States in the autumn of 1836, and by that December was living in Cambridge, which remained his home until his death more than 40 years later. While he often returned to Portland to visit his parents, he was more apt to remain around Boston even in the summers, when he vacationed at Nahant. This photo shows Longfellow in what is described as his summer home on Nahant as of 1850. This sign was added at the legendary rock where Longfellow was said to have sat and watched the sea. What keeper he actually conversed with is not mentioned.
The sign, which is being eaten away by the salt air, reads, "Henry Wadsworth Longfellow often walked from Portland to visit this lighthouse. The keepers were his friends, and it is believed he sat here for inspiration for his poem, The Lighthouse. Sail on, it says, sail on, ye stately ships, and with your floating bridge the ocean span. Be mine to guard this light from all eclipse. Be yours to bring man nearer unto man."
In the book Life of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, Volume 1, on page 15, there is a note about his boyhood home in Portland. In summer, it was pleasant enough to look out from the upper windows. Those of the boys' room looked out over the cove and the farms and woodlands toward Mount Washington, full in view on the western horizon, while the eastern chambers commanded a then unobstructed view of the bay, Whitehead, Fort Preble, and the Lighthouse on Cape Elizabeth. In Volume 2 of that series, also published by Samuel Longfellow, again, Portland Headlight is not mentioned by name by Samuel or in Longfellow's own hand from the included writings of his letters and journals. There is one mention of a ride to the Cape Lights. We made up a little party and drove to the Cape, visited the Bowery, where there is no bower, then went to the 2 lighthouses. I climbed to the top of the revolving one and found it as neat as a new pin. Below are oil jars, large enough to hold the 40 thieves. The Bowery he refers to could have been the farms along the roads in the location of Cape Elizabeth. Still today you will find farming in that area. His mention that there was no bower could refer to there being no shelter in the area to take refuge from the August sun. The 2 lights at Cape Elizabeth are more south than Portland Headlight and were completed in 1828, partly on the account of the wreck of the schooner Charles in July of 1807. They would have been in the closer vicinity of the Bowery Beach Road. There's at least one hypothesis that Crescent Beach was once known as Bowery Beach. Another current landmark in that area is the Cape's Bowery Beach School. The schoolhouse at Wheeler Road, and what is now named 2 Lights Road, first educated students sometime between 1845 and 1855. However, the year the Bowery Beach School was built or first welcomed students is not the subject of this video, but rather Longfellow's 1847 visit to the Bowery Beach neighborhood and his visit to the lights. And, of course, Route 77 along the section of the famed Beach to Beacon 10K starting line is also known as Bowery Beach Road. Thus, 2 Lights State Park was part of the original Bowery Beach neighborhood. And while you can no longer visit these 2 lighthouses as Longfellow once did, from the ledge at nearby Dyer Cove, you can get a glimpse of the 2 towers, for which the neighborhood known as 2 Lights gets its name. Which, by the way, is a fabulous place to get some Maine lobster. And while you're there, bring a book to read that has a lobster connection, albeit from a lake much farther north than Maine. Thus, what can we conclude about the sign about Longfellow's Rock? Is there truth to the tale of his sitting there and contemplating the words to his 1849 poem, The Lighthouse? No doubt the Portland area lighthouses impacted his words for his poem, but he mentions many lights in and around Boston and even during his travels in Europe. Again, referring to Samuel's Volume 2 in Chapter 24, The Last Years, for the decade of the years 1870 to 1881, he writes on page 463, "During these years, Mr. Longfellow continued to pass his summers at Nahant, but a week was always given to a visit to his sister in the old Portland home. There the passers-by could see his white locks as he sat in the old armchair at the front window. In these visits, it was always his choice to occupy the upper chamber, where he had slept as a boy. He could no longer look from it out to the lighthouse and the sea. He could only read, under the branches of the elm trees, the new signs across the street. That, of course, because of the development of Portland by those years. And this from Longfellow's own notes in 1859, from July 4th at Nahant. The entry reads, "A beautiful sunset. Through the purple and crimson vapors comes the mingling clangs of the bells of Lynn and the thunder of cannon from the forts in the harbor. Later we sit on the seaward veranda and see the fireworks all along the horizon, gleaming and disappearing like fireflies, while the steady old lighthouses hold up their lanterns, the street lamps along the highways of the sea." How often Longfellow walked to Portland Headlight during his visits home as an older man, or as a young man before moving from Maine, and sat with the keeper is in need of further research. Whether he took the walk in his later years and actually knew the Strouts, I have not been able to confirm. There are yet many of Longfellow's unpublished papers that are housed at Bowdoin College. They have been there for over 100 years. Unfortunately, as of late 2025, on the college library pages online, the collection is noted as restricted. So the subject is ripe for some aspiring historian to camp out in the Bowdoin archives and publish what, if anything, Longfellow wrote about his time visiting Portland Head and speaking with the keepers. We may never have the true answer about Longfellow walks to Portland Headlight, or for that matter, the reason behind the wreck of the Annie C. Maguire. Nonetheless, a visit to the light is exceptional at any time of the year. Well, we'll probably never know how the Annie C. Maguire shipwrecked right here at Portland Headlight, and certainly there's a lot more questions than answers. But the next time you visit, make sure you take a look at that rock with the Annie C. Maguire name on it and contemplate how that captain and crew managed to shipwreck right here at a lighthouse. And then you can wonder what happened to that money from the sea chest. I'm Tommy Carbone. I'll see you out on the trail or the next episode of My Maine Matters.
The rocky ledge runs far into the sea, and on its outer point, some miles away, the lighthouse lifts its massive masonry, a pillar of fire by night, of cloud by day. Even at this distance, I can see the tides upheaving, break unheard along its base, a speechless wrath that rises and subsides in the white lip and tremor of the face. And as the evening darkens, lo, how bright, through the deep purple of the twilight air, beams forth the sudden radiance of its light, with strange, unearthly splendor in the glare. Not one alone, from each projecting cape and perilous reef along the ocean's verge, starts into life a dim, gigantic shape, holding its lantern o'er the restless surge. Like the great giant Christopher, it stands upon the brink of the tempestuous wave, wading far out among the rocks and sands, the night overtaken mariner to save. And the great ships sail outward and return, bending and bowing o'er the billowy swells, and ever joyful as they see it burn, they wave their silent welcomes and farewells. They come forth from the darkness, and their sails gleam for a moment only in the blaze, and eager faces, as the light unveils, gaze at the tower and vanish while they gaze. The mariner remembers when a child, on his first voyage, he saw it fade and sink, and when, returning from adventures wild, he saw it rise again o'er ocean's brink, steadfast, serene, immovable, the same year after year, through all the silent night, burns on forevermore that quenchless flame, shines on that inextinguishable light. It sees the ocean to its bosom clasp, the rocks and sea sand with the kiss of peace, sees the wild winds lift it in their grasp and hold it up and shake it like a fleece. The startled waves leap over it, the storm smites it with all the scourges of the rain, and steadily against its solid form press the great shoulders of the hurricane. The seabird wheeling round it with the din of wings and winds and solitary cries, blinded and maddened by the light within, dashes himself against the glare and dies. A new Prometheus, chained upon the rock, still grasping in his hand the fire of Jove. It does not hear the cry, nor heed the shock, but hails the mariner with words of love. Sail on, it says, sail on, ye stately ships, and with your floating bridge the ocean span. Be mine to guard this light from all eclipse, be yours to bring man nearer unto man.